Welcome to the Sisters in Crime Writers Podcast. Everyone has a unique writing journey, so join us for conversations about those journeys from the writers themselves. This is Julie Henricus, the Executive Director of Sisters in Crime, and I'm delighted to welcome Stacey Horan to the podcast this week. Stacey writes about the things that scare her and plans to keep writing until nothing scares her anymore. She's the author of the award-winning Old City Mysteries, a paranormal mystery series set in historic St. Augustine, Florida. The series has earned a Silver Falchion Award, a Next Generation Indie Book Award, a Florida Authors and Publishers Association Silver Medal, and a Foreword INDIES Book of the Year shortlist. Stacey has also written 7 young adult novels, from paranormal thrillers to an adventure mystery series. She hosts the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, a long-running podcast with more than 250 episodes. Stacey, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Julie, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited. We have lots to talk about, but I'm going to start where I usually start on this podcast and ask you, when did you say to yourself, I want to be a writer?
I am not sure I actually ever used those words. I came to writing later in life. I never had any ambitions to be a writer when I was young. I didn't even know that was a thing that people did. I'm not sure how I thought books showed up in libraries. They just maybe magically appeared. But writing was never an ambition. It wasn't until I was probably a good 8 years into my career. So I finished college, went to law school, was practicing law. And around that time, I got to a point where I was desperate for some sort of creative outlet. And my job at the time was high stress, a lot of hours, and routine is not quite the right word, but I found myself having the same negotiations, the same conversations, working on the same kinds of deals, the same sort of documents over and over and over again all day long. And I really wanted something creative, and so I came to writing by process of elimination. I ruled out a lot of things. I had enjoyed dancing when I was young, but at that point, doing it well was beyond me. Yeah. I cannot paint or draw or sculpt. Stick figures they're about all I can manage, and badly. I don't play a musical instrument. I can't sing. So I was eliminating a lot of possibilities. I was also hamstrung by the fact that my job entailed working long hours and weekends, and that didn't leave a lot of time for much. So I decided one day, again, in a desperate attempt for something, to break out a legal pad and a pen, and I just started to write a story. I thought I'm just going to write whatever comes to mind because I just have to do something. And so I just started writing a story, and at the end of a couple pages, it was like exhaling. I don't know how else to describe it. It felt like I had taken a big breath and exhaled, and it was wonderful.
Yeah.
So I just kept doing it. I just, worked on that story a little bit, then realized the story was morphing into something else. So I sort of ran with that. And it was little bits, again, just writing a page or a paragraph, occasionally sitting at my desk during lunch while I was also doing 3 other things. And it was enough for a while to sustain me. And then after some period of time, I realized I've been doing this. I think there's a story here. Perhaps I should let it roll into a book. Let me see where I can go with this. So it was a while before I thought, I'd like to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to do it more than just as a filler for the in-between times between all the other stress and chaos and everything happening in life. So I don't know that I ever said, I want to write a novel or I want to be a writer. It was sort of a realization I came to after having done a little bit of it. Like, why don't I actually try to do this?
Well, it sounds to me like your muse was knocking on your door, on your imagination, and you need to find the outlet for that, right?
Yeah, yeah. I
Um,
mean, I was thinking, do I enroll in a tap dancing class? Do I try and take opera singing lessons? I mean, I was searching for anything and eliminating all these ideas. And finally, I thought, I've never really written. I mean, I was fine with doing it in school. I didn't
mhm.
mind writing assignments. I really didn't. But I never made the connection. Like this was something I could do. It would be something I would enjoy until I was so desperate that I gave it a shot.
Now, how did you hone your craft? Did you read books? I mean, you were doing it, but there's you can definitely learn on your own, and many people do, but there's helpful to understand story structure or
Right,
ways to sort of get past yourself or to
right.
build your ability. So how did you sort of hone craft?
Trial and error, I guess. I did read a number of craft books. When I decided to finally try and write a book, I realized I don't really know what that entails. I mean, I understand the mechanics of starting and finishing, but what does it really entail? So I read a number of craft books at the time and trial and error. It was a long time before I actually finished that first book that I was writing. And I would say, having worked as a lawyer for so long, I understood the technical side of things when I would read about it. I understood how to put sentences together and I understood how to get your point across. And
Mhm.
I understood how to write with clarity because a lot of legal writing is all about being concise and being clear, and every word and every punctuation mark is important. And so I understood that. What the bigger learning curves for me were, one, learning to accept feedback on something I had sort of poured my heart and soul into. That was a big learning curve for me, to accept it as something offered helpfully and
Mhm.
not critically.
Mhm.
So that took a while to get used to that. I'm better about it now. I'm still not great. I still don't enjoy opening. Usually when I get edits, I have to pause and be in the right frame of mind before I open them. But I understand why they're being given and the point people are trying to make. So that was a big learning curve. The other, perhaps even more important learning curve for me was to trust in the creative process, which is not something that I had a lot of experience with up until that point. I had to learn that when I sat down at the keyboard, that the story was more than likely going to show up for me that day. I
Mhm.
just had to trust that it would be there. It was scary. I mean,
Mhm.
that was scary because I hadn't had that experience before. I mean, everything I had written to date professionally was like there were examples. I
Mhm.
drafted contracts and I drafted corporate documents, and there were plenty of examples for me to look at, and I just needed to tweak this and adjust that, and it was fine. I could get it done. But writing a story that didn't exist before
Yeah.
was scary. So trusting in that process was hard at first. I equate it to cliff diving when I first began, like sitting down and just leaping off that cliff and hoping that that story is going to be there when I start typing. So those were the two big areas I had to work on, and that took a while. It really did.
Well, I also think that having a success in a career and having built skills as a lawyer and knowing what you're doing, it's sort of like, you can never coast. You always have to sort of engage, but it's like, I'm good at this. I know what I'm doing. I've been working on this. And then to embark on a creative path, which is hard. And also, your first draft is always going to be terrible. And it's hard to trust yourself that I can fix this. And when you're first starting, you're not 100% convinced you can. And sometimes those first stories, you really can't until you've written about 10 more. And then you could go back and say, okay,
Right.
now I understand why this didn't work. But
Right.
it is very vulnerable to sort of midlife go, yeah, I'm gonna risk my self-esteem on this. I'm gonna work on this.
Yeah. Yeah. It was hard. I learned in doing that, well, I never thought of being a writer, that being a storyteller was probably always there for me in one way or another. That part I had. I just had never channeled it into actually writing stories down and trying to make them good. So after doing it for a while, I thought, why didn't I know about this? Why did no one tell me this was a thing? I could have been doing this all along. And I'm not sure why that never happened. And so I just have to trust that if I had known about it earlier, I might have dismissed it. I might not have followed it. And so when I needed it later in life, I may never have gravitated towards it. The fact that it was new and different and exciting may have been what drew me to it when I needed it most.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, you only have so much bandwidth for life at any given time. And so it could be earlier in your career, your bandwidth was all taken in career building and life balancing. And then, once you got that sliver, you were looking for something creative, which I love. I love that you knew there was something missing and that you were needed to figure out how to fill that gap.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that that's a wonderful lesson for folks to hear about too. It's creativity comes in all different forms, and it's there's no one way to express it
That's
and to
right.
do things. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that, I think, that drive to make art, to kind of generalize in a variety of ways, writing or painting or dancing or baking or gardening or whatever, something to create
Mhm.
something new and beautiful and put it out in the world to make the world a little bit better. So I
Mhm.
think most people probably have that, and to find a way to channel that and use that to express yourself that way is a gift, really.
Well, and obviously you're a very good writer. You've moved beyond, but there's also something kind of wonderful about not being good at something and still doing it. About, being a terrible painter. I talk about this all the time. I love painting. I have no talent whatsoever, but that doesn't stop me from taking out a canvas every once in a while and slapping on some paint and throwing, just trying different things and hanging it proudly in my bathroom like this is my latest masterpiece. But because it gives you a thrill. It's like, okay, I'm not going to be good at this, whereas writing is a different journey for me because you can, you hone that craft and it's like, oh, I can do this.
Yes,
um, yeah, creative expression is a gift. I mean, it's just, I think it would cure a lot of ills if people just tried something.
that's true.
Right?
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Yeah. Just We should hand out crochet hooks to everyone in the country and just say,
Just
make
give
an
it a
octopus.
try.
Just give it a shot. Let's have a knit in and see how everyone does.
Right.
So some folks in your position, I've talked to a lot of lawyers on this podcast, would move into a legal thriller kind of world. Can we talk about your journey into writing paranormal? I mean, like, tell me about that, because I love that. I love that you sort of, again, you have this life and the skill set, and you're like, yeah, okay, we're going to explore something different.
Sure. I didn't always enjoy practicing law. It was not a calling for me. Again, I ended up doing it because I thought I liked the idea of it. I thought I would be good at it. I ended up developing the skills to become competent, if not good, at what I did. But I can't say that I loved it. So when I was writing, I chose from the very beginning never to write about it, never to write about the practice of law. Now, that's not to say that I will never write about it, but so far I haven't felt drawn to those kinds of stories. I have, however, always found it fascinating to ghost stories and stories about paranormal elements or aspects of life or the world. So it seemed fitting to try to write those kinds of stories because that's what interests me. And I thought if I'm going to spend my time doing it, I'd rather spend my time on something I find interesting, find
Right.
enjoyable, and scary versus something I don't really like. So writing about ghosts or people who can see ghosts or that kind of thing has been fun because I feel like I get to make up the rules for
Mm-hmm.
it. I get to say, dear reader, you and I are going to assume that this happens, and let me tell you a story about it. And
Mm-hmm.
I make up the rules for how that's going to work, what the parameters will be. So the Old City Mysteries, one of the main characters is a 15-year-old boy who can see dead people. And I spent time thinking about what the rules would be for that. He will be able to do this, but not that. And other people in there who can do similar things will be able to do this, but not that. And once I had in my mind how it would work, then it was very easy to incorporate it into the story.
That's your legal mind. It's like I set up the world, I set up the rules, and then I follow the rules
Right.
because that's how my mind works.
Right.
I
And
do.
it helps be consistent too, because I knew I'd want to write more than one book in the series. And so I didn't want to, in book one, he can do this kind of thing, but in book two, he can suddenly do something else
Right.
and not, and I also didn't want to forget what I had done in the first book or change my mind 3 books down the line. So yeah, I wanted there to be a framework, and then in that framework, I would be able to maneuver.
This you've anticipated my question because this is what I love to talk to folks who write paranormals or magic realism or things like that, is this world building where you make the rules that sounds so freeing, but also you make the rules, and in book 4 you may need desperately for a rule you set up in book 1 not to be in fact the rule, but it
Right.
is. And I have a friend who wrote a book, Magical Realism, with magic in it. And she said, I never knew I would be so frustrated by how I made leprechauns in my book. When in book 4 is like, but they have to be able to do this. I've written myself into a corner 4 books later.
Yeah. It's a worry. I purposely spread out the the talent for sensing spirits or talking with them or communicating with them or understanding what was happening sort of on the other side of the veil, let's say. I spread that out amongst a couple of different characters. And so I did that thinking, if I have everyone doing exactly the same thing with the exact same limitations, I might get in trouble. But if someone can do X and someone else can do Y,
Right.
then later on, if I need X or I need Y, I will just have to make sure it's that character who
Right.
does it. And I will have to make sure the story works for them to make an entrance and do what they need to do and solve my problem. So there was a fair bit of thought around that. And I did research on it. I read books about it and I talked to some people about it. And I said, well, how does, in interviews, how does it work for you? And what do you think about X? Could it ever be Y? And by the time I finished all that, I had a pretty good idea of what would work for me. And that was more important than making sure everyone in the world bought in to
Right.
what I was doing. I thought as long as it feels right for me, then that's what we're going to go with. So that's how it came to be. There was a fair bit of research before, which sounds counterintuitive when you talk about making stuff up. But I found in most of the authors I've talked to, no matter what they write, there's a lot of research that goes into it.
Absolutely.
Even if they are literally making up a world on another planet in another galaxy, they are still researching. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
And perhaps in that research using one line,
Right.
or two sentences in a descriptive paragraph, but they've read about it for 3 weeks.
Right.
I mean, this is both the wonder and the rabbit hole of being an author is that the research can take you places you didn't expect, but you have to go there because who knows if I need to know this. I mean,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, but you had said when you started the first book, you knew or you had anticipated it was going to be a series of books.
For this series, yes. So I had the idea for it, and I thought, well, if I'm going to do it, I'd like to at least spend some time in this world. So I anticipated a 3-book arc. And so there are 3 books in this series that are out. I'd like to visit that world again. So I would like to write more books in the series. I've taken a pause for it. But if I do, I don't just want to write one more. I would probably think about at least 2 or 3 more at a time and plan for that. So the way I approach the series is in each book, they're standalone as far as the mystery is concerned, but the main characters develop over the 3-book arc. And in each book, it focuses a bit on each one, and sometimes there's more emphasis on one of the main characters versus the other. But by the time we got to the 3rd book, it ended, and I felt like, okay, I've left them in a pretty good place. So if I don't go back and write books 4, 5, 6, whatever, I think they'll be okay. I think I've set them up for success if I don't get to go back and visit them again. So that was the goal. I wanted to make sure I took them from rock bottom to a fairly decent place. And I knew that was going to be more than one book.
Well, and I love what you're saying is having a 3-book arc means that you've got to wrap it up in one. I mean, every book will, if somebody picks up in the middle, they can read it. But if they read it in order, they're going to see growth or change or something getting better. Hopefully not worse, but sometimes that's the case.
Sometimes.
Sometimes, but it's the author thinking that through of, okay, what adjustments, what's the growth, what do I really want to do, what are the themes? I mean, this, I know that readers appreciate the work that writers do, but I hope folks, especially writers who are listening to this, appreciate it's not wasted to spend time thinking all this through and to really be fretting over, do I want this here or should I save it for the next book? I mean, that's not wasted time.
No, no, it's not. I find that part of it enjoyable. Not every writer does. I think there are probably plenty of writers who want to just dive right in and see what happens. And I have certainly pantsed some books, and I can't say that I'm a serious plotter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always impressed by people who can, who say, okay, I know I'm going to have 40 chapters and I write, I have an outline for each chapter and I know all the details. I know exactly where I'm going and I do all of that before I start writing. And I would probably abandon ship before, if that was how I had to do it. So I sit somewhere in between on the spectrum. I have pantsed an entire book before, and it was terrifying, and it took and inefficient.
Right.
And I have plotted books that the Old City Mysteries. I spent time plotting before I wrote because I knew I was doing more than one book.
Right.
So I didn't do a detailed outline, but I had an idea of hitting the different points and knowing what needed to happen in each book. And I had a roadmap, I would say, versus a detailed outline.
Mm-hmm.
But generally I sit somewhere in between. And certainly even with the outline, there were times when I veered off course and I off-roaded for a while and eventually made it back to the outline. And I thought, well, okay, then we will make some adjustments, but that's where they wanted to go. So we took a detour. So
Yes. Well, and I love that the signposts model of, I know I need to get here, but it's I can go 5 different directions. So as long as I get there, I'm just going to go for it and then maybe adjust the route markers moving forward since we had that little detour. I mean, that's part of it too. And there's so many ways to structure and one thing that I love, and I'm sure when you talk to authors on your podcast, it's the same thing. You want to really, there's no one way to do this. And
no.
you can have 5 different ways of doing it for the same project. I mean, you got to give yourself the grace and the space to do what you need to do.
Right. Right. Yeah. I am always amazed every time I talk to an author. They approach writing differently. They get out of writing something different, something unique.
Mm-hmm.
They tell their stories differently. They come into a story from different angles. Even if you always start with character, the way you do it's going to be different from the 10 other authors sitting next to you. So I never cease to be amazed by how writers write.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's again, the subconscious is an amazing thing, and then building craft and learning and everything else.
Yeah, it's the magic.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's the magic. And I think most of the writers I've talked to have learned to tap into that, to appreciate that, to enjoy that part of the process, the art part of
Mm-hmm.
writing. It's easy to get bogged down in the craft, but to me, the enjoyment is the magic, the art
Yeah.
aspect of it.
Well, and I would imagine with having a legal mind and legal training, being able to let go and let the story go and not trying to fit it all so that people it's just, you know, it's a completely different way of telling a story and with different outcomes. And that must be freeing and sort of happy as well.
Yeah, that was exactly the word I was thinking. It's freeing.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah, I talk to journalists a lot as well on this. So many crime writers come from legal and journalism, but journalists also, there's something freeing about being able to tell the story that they wish they've been able to tell, right? I
Right.
mean,
Right.
so there's a lot to that. So you wrote your first three books and figured out how to write a series and how to write a book. You know, you're learning and moving. Um, it's never easy to write a book, but talk to me about writing the next books. Did you sort of, most writers will make it more difficult on themselves by adding, like, what else can I do now that I've figured this part out? Or, did you, build a world differently because you maybe made some mistakes besides planning, or just made some constraints on what you could do? Or tell me about writing the next ones and how you kind of moved your craft up.
Yeah. Well, I actually started writing young adult. So that's where I started. And I had a series there. And so I feel like cut my teeth on that. The Old City Mysteries came when I switched audiences. So I started writing adult mysteries. I learned a lot writing young adult. There was a series in that one, and I had just a vague idea of what would happen overall in the series. And I learned that to be efficient and to be able to make the story deeper and to have more elaborate details in the world building, it was better to do more planning than just write the book and then be like, okay, time for the next one. Now, the young adult series was not that detailed, right? Because it's a different audience, and so the emphasis is on other things. But when I switched to an adult audience, I thought it's now time to spend more of my energy on taking the characters deeper, taking the setting deeper.
Mhm.
I have more freedom to make the mysteries more complex, more interesting. And just writing for an adult audience was, again, freeing.
Mhm.
It was even more enjoyable than writing young adult. So, having written the first three in the Old City Mystery series, the work in progress now is a departure. And I'd like to say I learned some lessons from that, but it seems like that's not necessarily been the case. So I did try to plot this next book. And the problem with this one, and I'm not sure why, I don't really know, except that maybe it had to be this way, but it was much more elusive than the series. So this one is currently standalone, but now that I've written it, it feels like there's more to tell.
Mhm.
So it's still early stages, and there's a lot of editing to be done. But this one was much more elusive. So this was much more of a pantsing exercise. I had signposts, but fewer of them. And they weren't necessarily clear. I just understood, okay, about this point, something bad has to happen. But I was unclear
Mhm.
as to exactly what that was going to be. I just knew I was working towards it. So it was a lot more pantsing between. But it was an exercise in bravery. I just assumed when I sat down that story would come, and it did, but it took longer. So it was not as efficient.
Mhm.
It took longer to write, and that was a bit disappointing because I got used to being able to write faster because I had a clearer idea of where I was headed. This one was very foggy. So yeah, I'm not sure why that was, but I just feel like it was surprising every time I wrote. I would write the scene. I'm like, wow, okay, I did not know that was going to happen. I did not see that coming. So it was enjoyable in that respect, but far from efficient.
Well, but in the first series, you were writing, spent so much time world building and rule building and everything else. And so is the current book, the standalone, is it paranormal as well, or is it?
It is not. And so I didn't spend as much time world building. It was It takes place just in a suburban neighborhood, and it involves a book club. And so I had an idea and this idea has been with me for years. So I had an idea. I spent some time drawing the map of the neighborhood. So I had it clear in my mind where everyone lived. And I knew we had lived my husband and I had lived in an area. Again, it takes place in Florida. So we had lived in this area. It takes place over South Florida. And so I knew what life was like down there. And I didn't spend as much time thinking about all the rules because it was modern day and there wasn't a magical element. But this book club and these women, I was on the outside of it for years. I understood I had an idea of who they were, but I didn't really know them deeply. And they were going about their business, doing what they were doing. And I couldn't figure out a way in, even as the writer. Like I was making this up and I still couldn't figure out how to get in. And it finally came to me. I understood how to get in. I understood the character who was going to lead me into their circle. So once I had that, then it sort of, I knew I had the green light. So I started writing. But even as I wrote and I understood that there was a dead body. But even as I started, I didn't know who it was. So I started the book with an idea of how it was ending, but I was still unclear of who was going to end up dead by the end.
So many things to ask you about this, because I think that this is also a great conversation to have. Just because you've written a lot of books doesn't mean the next book's going to be easy. And it's always hard, but it can be unexpectedly challenging. And, thank you for being honest about that and sort of talking about it. I know folks who start, well, they kind of know maybe, and here we go. And then, they'll send me a note. Well, I'm 3/4 of the way through and I don't know who did it. And then they'll finish the book and say, yeah, I got the protagonist wrong. So I got to go back and fix and adjust. And that's part of the process. But for you, was it, did you keep moving forward as you're struggling, or did you keep going back and fixing things? How did you keep moving?
Yeah, this one was different from the others in that I didn't. I write linearly. I start at the beginning and I finish at the end, and I don't hop around. I know some authors can sort of Frankenstein their novels, and I can't do that. It doesn't sit well. I feel unsettled if I try that. So even with this one, I started at the beginning and I just wrote as it went. But the idea, the characters in this book, they play their cards very close to their vest anyway. So I understood that I would only get glimpses as I came to them in the story. That being said, I was nervous as I got closer to the end. Did I have it wrong? Did that glimpse of the end, was that in fact wrong? And if it was I going to need to start all over? But as I got closer, I realized, it became clear. Okay, now I understand who dies, but it really wasn't until the very end that I understood how it happened, how exactly it happened, and how it related to all the other characters. I mean, I had a vague idea that someone was involved, and I had to trust that was going to happen. And it made for some very nerve-wracking writing sessions. So it made things slow. So normally when I write, I tend to edit as I go. Mm-hmm. So when I end up at the end, it's reasonably clean. I realize if I need to make an adjustment as I'm writing something, that I'll go back then and adjust and make things consistent before moving forward. And I don't have a problem with that. It's things still flow. This one, since it was so elusive, I thought, okay, I only make minor adjustments each day. And I just kept writing because I really was afraid it was just going to disappear. The story
Yeah.
was just going to disappear. So editing on this, since I just finished the first draft, editing will take longer than it normally does because now I do have to go back and make sure everything is consistent now that I have the whole picture. But that's not normally the case for me.
And it sounds to me as if because this is truly a discovery draft for you, you couldn't even leave yourself a note to go back and fix X, Y, or Z because you weren't sure what needed to be fixed or what was going to happen next. So your
Right.
editing is going to be rereading and
Yes.
really pulling it apart so you could say, okay, what's happening here?
Right. I have a feeling there'll be a number of paragraphs where I'm like, what was I thinking there? Why did I say it was going to be that? That doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I think it's going to be an ugly editing process.
But you don't want to get rid of those paragraphs because chances are for some of them, you're going to realize you were a genius because later on you use that paragraph.
I'm hoping I'm a genius more often than not, but I don't know.
Yeah. Now, do you write in Word? Do you write in Scrivener?
I write in Word because that's how I grew up. Right?
Yeah.
That was how I learned to write professionally. It's where everything was done. And so to me, it's easier. Now, that being said, I keep an Excel spreadsheet of what I call story files. So there's in there's a sheet for all the characters with all their backstories and all the details. So I can refer back and realize, oh no, they have 3 kids, not 2, et cetera, et cetera. And then I have usually one on location or the world building, what everything is called and where it's located, and then a miscellaneous, maybe miscellaneous characters or nicknames or recipes or whatever other details I think I'm going to need. So as I'm coming to something and I'm writing and I'm making something up, I usually stop and at least make a note of it in the spreadsheet so that I have it, so I don't have to keep searching the Word document. But I write in Word. I tried Scrivener early on and it was slowing me down. And I thought, well, I don't know that it, at least at that point, it wasn't, for me, it wasn't adding enough for me to stop and spend the time to become proficient at it. I've just gotten used to Word, so it doesn't bog me down trying to use it.
Are you still finding that joy after this latest first draft?
Yes, yeah, I do. Because I still marvel at the idea that such a thing can be done, that people can sit down and create a story, and it can be unique from the other stories that are out there, and it'll be because they wrote it. I still marvel at it as an exercise, as
Yeah.
it still feels, it's exciting to me to think of it as putting art into the world, because it was, again, that was not something I ever thought I would be able to do, because I never really considered myself an artist. So I still find joy in it. And I'm hoping to keep doing it. I can't imagine that will diminish. Even after all these years, it hasn't. So I feel pretty confident that it'll still be fun. It'll still be exciting with the next book and the book after and so on.
So, the writing journey, we've been talking about that. Publishing journey is a separate thing. And again, if people ever binge these podcasts, they're going to say, she says the same thing every time, but, whatever. Because your writing world, you can control.
Right.
It's yours. You write what you want. You do whatever. But the publishing part is different. That's the business part. And whether you're traditionally or indie published, there's just things you have to learn and understand and marketing and all that. Talk to me about your publishing journey.
Yeah. So the publishing part of it is not my favorite part. I don't know. I haven't talked to too many authors who say they love that part of it, but I made the decision to indie publish my stories. And I did it for one primary reason. It's not to say that I didn't want to go the traditional publishing route. I just understood for me that it was more important for me to be able to write the next story than for me to be traditionally published. So, and by that, here's what I mean. The first book I ever wrote, I put it out. The first book I wrote that I packaged and finished and thought, okay, this is a novel. I will see if anybody wants it. So I queried, not a lot, but I queried and I waited. And in that waiting, while it was out, I felt a bit in limbo. Like it was hard for me to write something new, really hard. And I don't necessarily know why that was, but I just felt like I couldn't move on to the next project because this one was unfinished, was out there. So after the rejections came back, enough of them came back, and I was like, okay, I can finally just say enough. And I put it to the side, and I wrote something else, got it to a point where I thought, okay, we'll try again. And I sent that one out. And again, queried a little bit, and the rejections came back. And again, I was sort of in limbo. I had ideas for another book, and I just didn't feel like I could really start it. So I kind of jotted some notes, and at the time we were living in New York, and that story was going to be based in New York. So I would drag my husband around the city, and I'd take pictures. And I was trying to fill the time, like getting ready to write this next book. And the rejections came back, and one came back in an envelope. And I thought, well, that's strange. So I read it, and it was like, thank you, but no thanks. I thought, all right, fine. And then I read it again, and I realized it was a rejection letter for the first book I had queried a long time prior. Yeah. And that was the moment I thought, I can't do this. If this is how it's going to be for me, and I am paralyzed to move forward until I am sure it's a yes or a no, then I will never get anything done. Mm-hmm. So I made the decision that going forward, if I decided I wanted to query, I'd send just a few out. And if the answers were no, I would start taking steps to self-publish it. And so I was at least making steps forward. And as soon as I'd made that decision, I was able to write again. I was able to start moving forward. So I could polish a book, get it ready to be self-published, and write the next one. All of a sudden, I was able to do a lot more. So that's the path that I've taken. And with the Old City mysteries, I decided same thing. I will put a few queries out there. If the initial response is no, in order to write books 2 and 3, I'm gonna indie publish them. And so when that happened, I think after like maybe the third rejection, I'm like, okay, enough. For my own sanity, this is what I'm going to do. And so I attacked it, editing and polishing and formatting and cover design and all of that stuff. I've just figured it out, and I am no ace, but I learned enough to enable me to keep moving forward, because that was what was most important to me. So I think for a lot of people, realizing what is most important about the publishing side of things in order to transition from just writer to published author, deciding what is most important and going for that, I think is key. And for me, it was understanding that I was paralyzed when I was in that limbo, and I wanted just to keep writing. So I had to find a way to make that happen. And it's a decision I'm okay with. I'm okay with doing it that way.
And what you just said about know what your goals are for your writing career, is it keep writing books? Is it this one book being out in the world? I mean, what do you want? And again, no two writers are going to have the same answer, but answer that for yourself as you're figuring out what your path's going to be. I mean, that's an important part.
Yeah. I mean, and own that answer. I mean,
Yes.
don't feel like you need to apologize if you decide, oh well, I'm just going to keep trying to be traditionally published, and I've got 20 manuscripts and none of them have been picked up yet. But I'm just going to keep trying. Fine, that's great.
Yes.
Go for it. Keep
Go
going
ahead.
for it. That's
Yeah.
admirable. Or if you're like, no, I'm bypassing all of that, and I'm going to self-publish the hell out of this stuff, then great. Do it. Absolutely. I applaud you. But I think that's it. Just make that decision and go for it, because life becomes better once you're moving
Right.
in whatever direction. And I think most people find that things start happening once there's momentum.
Yes.
Not
Yes.
necessarily in the direction you're headed. Sometimes it takes you in a completely different direction, but that's when things really start happening.
Yes. And, as you said earlier, just because you decide to indie publish this doesn't mean, so this book that you're working on, you may say, this is standalone. I'm going to try and query it, or I'm going to do this. Or you go to a conference and somebody's interested, you're like, okay, sure, let's see what's going. I mean, you're not stuck. You can
Right.
change. It's a roller coaster of a ride, but the beauty is that you can adjust the ride anytime you want.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no shortage of options for people these days. And I think that's great. In some ways it may be harder to find to get people to see your books, to learn about you, to find you, but there's no shortage of opportunity to try.
Right.
So, it'll all be different. Each book has been different so far, and I am okay with that.
Talk to me about the importance of community in writing.
This was something I learned later, and I didn't really realize it because I as a lawyer, I had spent most of my time sitting by myself at my desk writing documents, and maybe talking over the phone, and the community was often antagonistic,
Mm-hmm.
often sitting across the table from someone negotiating something, or with a client who was not happy that things were taking so long or costing so much or whatever. So it was not necessarily harmonious kind of profession.
Yeah.
So I didn't expect anything other than that when I started writing and started to take it seriously. I didn't really give much thought to needing other writers or learning from other authors or just sitting in community with them. That was something I learned later. I remember the first conference I went to was Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and walking into that in New York City, being blown away by how many people were doing this.
Yeah.
I spent the day in awe of all these people doing all these different things. And the first BoucherCon I went to, and I thought, wow, I may have found my people. So that was amazing. Even the first write-in for Sisters in Crime, I didn't really understand what that was. We log into Zoom and we write independently, and yet we chat. I didn't really understand, but I thought, all right, I will give it a shot. And it was great.
Yeah.
And I was hooked. And so it's something I have grown to appreciate, but it was never something I expected to find.
Mm-hmm.
And the podcast that I started all those years ago, I did it really hoping that I could help someone else, not necessarily thinking I was going to get much in return, but I was hoping maybe I could help some other writers get their books in the hands of readers. That's really was the goal. But I have learned something with every person I have talked to. And it has kept me going. Every time I have an interview, I'm like, oh, they were so inspiring. That was so interesting. I would never have thought to do it that way. Or how crazy, how brave, how marvelous. And so I think everybody finds community differently. Everybody uses that community differently. And again, that's okay. For me, it's really an understanding that there are other people out there doing it differently and loving it. And therefore, it's okay for me to find my own path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so well said. Stacey, thank you so much for being on this podcast. And it was wonderful to talk to you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for inviting me. This has been great. I appreciate it, Julie.
Thank you for being with us today. Sisters in Crime is about community. We were founded to advocate for women crime writers, and we continue that mission by fighting for equity in the crime writing community. Sisters in Crime is an international, inclusive organization for all who write and love crime fiction, mystery, thrillers, and suspense. Join us at sistersincrime.org and make sure you subscribe to this podcast.